Right here is Mano Paul. Mano started out his career as a shark researcher in the Bahamas. I'm sure he's got some great stories to tell about that. And then he came to the United States to get his degree in management information systems and worked for Dell. At Dell, he played several roles, including software developer, tester, logistics manager, technical architect, IT strategist, security engineer, program manager. And within his security experience, he's done security programs from compliance to coding, application security risk management, security strategy and management, and conducting security awareness sessions, training and education. His company, Secure Risk Solutions, partners with ISC Squared. Next to him is Richard Tusansky, who has over 15 years assessing and managing risk in cybersecurity programs, and he's currently shaping the cybersecurity policy at Lockheed Martin by leading an alignment to the NIST and ISO standards. Next to him is Jeff Williams, who you've met many times throughout the conference. One new point that hasn't been mentioned that I've heard is he has a law degree from Georgetown. I thought that was interesting. Okay. Next to him is Hord Tipton. Hord is the executive director for ISC Squared. Previously, he was the CEO and president of Ironman Technologies, where his clients included IBM, Perot Systems, EDS, Booz Allen Hamilton, ESRI, and Symantec. And before founding that, he served for 5 years as the Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Department of the Interior. Hord has received the Distinguished Rank Award from the President of the United States. So it's quite a great panel. They've all traveled quite a long distance to come here. So why are we here to talk about identity management? We've been, heard about cross-site scripting for the last day and a half. Well, as a CISO, we like to quote Verizon breach report and other things to show how important our work is. And that states that 77% of the breaches were identity management related, whether it was using stolen credentials, brute force, dictionary attacks, guessing default or easy to guess passwords, or lack of proper authentication or authorization. So let's start with Mano, think about where does identity management fit into web application security, and how important do you see it?
There you go. I didn't know if I needed a microphone, but this makes my voice a lot more bass than it is, all right? So let's, why do we really need identity management? If I was to look at it, I was thinking about that question itself, and I was thinking as to how we've seen cross-site scripting, we've seen SQL injection, we've take buffer overflows, you take pretty much any of the different common application security threats and vulnerabilities. All of them have some kind of an impact once they execute, and you can exploit that vulnerability in that application. But then if you are familiar with the stride stack of threats, the spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevated privileges, one of the things that you would notice is when you have a breakdown in identity management, you pretty much can do any of that stack. In fact, it covers all of those. You could spoof and impersonate another person. You could tamper and get data modified. You could have information disclosure and confidentiality breaches. So it affects the entire stack, and so it's kind of critical from that standpoint. The 77% from an identity management breach that was as part of that report, if you were to actually go back and peel under the covers for that number, invariably, you and I would find that it had something to do with software security, which from an OWASP perspective as well is why we are here. So, application security vulnerabilities lead to identity management issues that lead to the breaches that we see today. Doesn't necessarily mean that all identity management issues are just application related, or not all application related issues are identity management issues, but kind of they have a large overlap and intersect.
Thank you. Jeff, do you want to tell us a bit about the security ecosystem project through OWASP?
Sure. Yeah, so let me follow up on the first question real quickly, though. I think, identity is obviously really critical. You can't do virtually anything in application security without identity. You can't do access control without understanding who is involved. You can't do logging to get accountability on transactions. All these things we want to do rely on identity under the hood. So the OWASP Ecosystems project is set up to try to foster ecosystems that will force things to develop and evolve. We're trying to take the idea that, we're not smart enough to build something that's going to work in all situations right up front. But we can put in place a process and an ecosystem around an idea to force it to become secure over time. And so we're trying to foster ecosystems around different languages, like the Python ecosystem I mentioned yesterday. Force.com, the Salesforce API, we're working with them to develop their API, which is based on our ASAPI project, and build an ecosystem around that. And identity is a perfect opportunity to build a thriving ecosystem. Now, we've been struggling to build an identity ecosystem for years, right? We've been worried about PKI, we've tried federation, there's all kinds of different models for identity and managing credentials. Even in the real, the real world, we struggle with identity all the time, right? We got passports and driver's licenses and all kinds of identity management systems. You guys are probably carrying a couple identification tokens with you now. It's hard in the real world. So what we want to do is, I think it's a perfect opportunity to build an ecosystem that will develop those ideas, challenge them, make them stronger. It's going to find problems, but we're focused on building stuff that's strong and usable. That's our goal with the ecosystem.
Okay, thank you. Now we want to talk about the governance and management of identity management systems. The Department of Homeland Security recently released the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace paper. And their aim is to standardize on a reliable credential and recommending that systems be interoperable. Hord, you've got the most government experience. Where do you see the public sector fitting in? Do they own the problem and the solution of this?
I think that's the only reason you all invited me to sit on this panel is I'm, I guess, the graybeard, the baby boomer that's not all of a sudden not a baby boomer. And I've lived a lot of these bad experiences and can attest what happens when things go awry and you don't have a full, in my view, a full picture of what your problems really are. And I think the ecosystem project that Jeff discussed is more of a holistic understanding of why things aren't working. And my frustration comes in that I tried doing identity management in the Department of Interior as CIO and as also security officer. That's about 8 years ago. And I had the smartest guy in government on this project, a fellow named Bob Donaldson, who just contacted me out of the blue, by the way, 2 days ago, without even knowing I was going to talk about him. But we had an identity management system up, both logical and physical, on smart card, PKI, the whole works. And it worked. We even made the secretary go home and get her card one day because she had forgotten it and couldn't get into her computer just to, she wanted to set an example for doing that. The rest of government decided that this is something that should be done on an enterprise level. And we all have to kind of agree with that because the U.S. is particularly full of entrepreneurs, and we've built silos all around. Well, I had built a silo in Interior, a working silo. Now all of a sudden, we need to go to one for all of government. So my guy was put in as chair of the committee that was to establish the standard for the full government work of that. Well, unfortunately, they didn't choose my standard, which meant my system got scrapped. And we had a lot of money go down the tube there, and a lot of promises were made that, well, in a couple of years, we'll have one that works all across government. You can take this smart card and go anywhere. Slick it in the scanner and bingo. I'm only advised that just recently do people actually think that the system is working in the government side. And now they're ready to impose it on the states and move it down to the next notch. So I think your comment that things need to be solved over time like that, they also need to be solved with architecture. These things, if we had the foresight of predicting these problems up front and didn't have all of the legacy things that we had to protect, and that they weren't all different, and they were all in the same format, and we didn't have concerns over proprietary materials and solutions, and it all wasn't nice and open, and that companies didn't have to make profits and protect their IP at the same time, and then still be open and solve things like this. Rolling all of that stuff together makes it a huge problem.
So what did you think of the recent report?
The recent, I'm sorry.
The
Department of Homeland
Department of
Security.
Homeland Security identity
Oh.
strategy?
This is one of the few things, I guess, that Jeff and I agree on. I think they're on the right track of once again trying to learn from lessons learned. But again, they're going to face huge political challenges on getting the thing through. And it's not you got money, you got resources, you got politics, you got all of those things that factor into this. But I, like you, worry about looking at it as another silver bullet that is going to once again solve all of the problems. It's the kind of the flavor of the day. And having spent 27 years in government, I know how that works. You react to the catastrophe, you come up with a solution, you pound that solution to death, and it eventually something good comes out of it, but in my opinion, it's not going to be as great as they think that it will, as fast as it will.
So my thoughts on it are that, so the government put out this report that outlines a strategy for identity going forward. And there's some really cool things about it, right? It acknowledges the idea that there will be multiple authentication schemes running simultaneously, right? That's new, right? It's not government trying to mandate a single solution for everyone. So very cool. They proposed an attribute-based scheme as opposed to an identity-based scheme, which is really cool, right? That means you can have a system that will attest to various attributes about an individual, like I'm 6'8", and not my identity, for instance, right? So very powerful. It makes the system much more flexible and usable for access control decisions and so on. However, I have some concerns, right? I think that there's some privacy concerns whenever you try to enforce real strong identity frameworks, that there's some privacy concerns that go along with that naturally, because we've got a strong tradition of anonymity in cyberspace that gets challenged. So I think there's some issues there. But my primary concern with the whole thing is that DHS is focusing all of its efforts on authentication and identity. And despite the statistic, right, about breaches and 76% and so on, it's clearly not the case that most of the problem is due to identity. Most of the problem is due to faulty software, right? We've got problems building software securely, and this won't address that whatsoever. And in fact, that real problem will undermine this solution. No matter what we do with identity, if you can break into the software, it doesn't matter. So, I like it. I think it's pushing in one direction, and it's moving that particular little ecosystem down the road, but it's not going to solve the bigger problem, which is where we should be spending a huge amount of effort in actually getting the security flaws out of our software. So.
I agree with Jeff on some points with that national strategy to secure identities in cyberspace by DHS, and again, it's in draft form right now. It hasn't been finalized, so you all have an opportunity to comment on it. I think one thing that it does is, again, it kind of promotes that idea of an identity ecosystem, if you will, which really ties in, I think, quite nicely to the OWASP security ecosystem project, which I believe that particular project engages vendors to implement solutions securely. I think the challenge for our application security